Hey there YouTube, and welcome to Ask a Maestro. This week's question comes from Shannon Stein of the Metropolitan Youth Symphony, who asks, why are there two sections of violins? I think we all know that the answer is to breed contempt and resentment among violinists. Now, this is a tricky question because it's almost axiomatic. I mean, if you spend any time in and around the orchestra world, you just take it for granted that there are two sections of violins. But it's a good question because why should it be that way? There's only one section of violas, of cellos, of basses. Why are there twice as many violins in an orchestra as any of those other string instruments? If you look at an orchestra, you will often see a sort of vast field of violins and violas. It can be hard to tell where the boundaries are. But if you look at an orchestra that seats its strings in the old-fashioned European model, that is, with first violins on the left of the conductor and second violins to the right of the conductor, it becomes much more apparent that there are, in fact, two distinct sections of violins. Now, this is not a question I had ever considered before, and I got really curious to know if this is the way that it always had been done. So I went to my trusty and very expensive college textbooks to see what I could figure out. It turns out that if you go back even several hundred years, orchestras really always had two sections of violins. Now there's one big exception to this, and that comes from 17th century France, from the court of Louis XIII and Louis XIV. The French court employed an orchestra known as les 24 violons du roi, the 24 violins of the king. Now in this case, violins didn't mean violins, it meant members of the violin family. So there were actually 6 violins, and there were 6 cellos. And in between them, there were 3 sections of violas. Take a look at these musicians who have recreated the band of the 24 violins of the king. You'll see the violins on the left. Then there are 4 musicians playing a small-sized viola, 4 musicians playing a regular-sized viola, and 4 musicians playing a viola that is close in size to a cello. So this orchestra, which was directed mainly by Jean-Baptiste Lully, is really the one setup where, over a large period of time, there was consistently repertoire written and performed by an ensemble that didn't have the traditional first violin, second violin, viola, cello. So then, why did the now standard setup with the 2 violin sections gain supremacy? Well, the reason for this is because we have to keep in mind that instrumental music usually mirrors what's going on in vocal music. In fact, it really wasn't until the latest part of the 17th century that music was really published separately for instrumental ensembles. Up until then, music was really written for voices, and it was just marketed as also playable by instrumental ensembles. Okay, so now let's think about vocal music. There are 4 basic ranges for the human voice. There are higher women's voices, lower women's voices, higher men's voices, and lower men's voices. So that means that if a composer is looking for a way to incorporate the maximum range of vocal music in the smallest number of parts, that would be 4. They can write from the lowest men's bass part to the highest women's soprano part. And so it became standard to have a 4-instrument setup that would mimic this layout. Now, here I am including the basses with the cellos. And of course, this combined cello-bass section is comparable to the lowest bass men's voice. Some of us are #blessed with a beautiful clarion tenor. And for us, the viola most closely mimics our own voice type. La, la. So that leaves the violin to approximate low women's voices and high women's voices. And in fact, it does this incredibly well. Anyway, YouTube, that's it for this episode of Ask a Maestro. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and of course, leave your questions in the comments. I look forward to reading them and responding to them. Until the next time I see you, go play an instrument or sing a song. And until then, goodbye everyone.